Welcome to round 11 of the World Chess Championship between Liren and Gukesh Dommaraju. The players are tied at 5 going into this match, and let me just say before we get started, this was much more interesting than the last game. So I think you're going to enjoy this one. Let's go ahead and just take a look. So knight to f3, d5. Gukesh is playing with white, by the way. And he plays the move c4, and Ding pushes the pawn. And immediately in the next couple of moves, we get a very interesting situation. b4, c5, and e3. Now, what has happened here is what's called the Blumenfield Gambit, except it's reversed. So the Blumenfield Gambit is an opening that's usually played by black that looks just like this, except now we have it from the white perspective. So let me show you what I'm talking about. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, c5, d5, b5. The Blumenfield counter gambit, apparently is what it's called. And this is a kind of a fighting opening for black, right? You're giving up a pawn, for example, takes. This pawn is just a free pawn to get strong pawns in the center and just totally imbalance the position. And black has some nice fighting opportunities there. So we get the same thing except from white's perspective. So this is a very interesting opening decision. And after the move e3, I want you to pay attention to Liren's time. He's got 1 hour and 57 minutes. And it goes down to 1 hour and 19 minutes. This is the 4th move of the game for him. He thinks for almost 40 minutes. So what does this tell you? This tells you he was surprised. It tells you that Gukesh, has planned something and Ding wasn't ready for it, right? 40 minutes is a very long time to think on move 4. So he's caught off guard. And by the way, if he wants to, he can take, and it's a free pawn. You can't get this pawn back with white. If you try to go check, the knight defends. If you try to attack the knight, he's just going to go bishop d7. And after this trade, you don't want to take this pawn because the move e6 hits your queen. You're down tempo. This bishop is a monster. Your position is not very good, and this is just a bad situation for white. So if this were to happen, instead white would play d4, just get the pawns in the center and go for development. I think you play a3 usually and either recapture that way or get your bishop out like this. But Ding thinks for that long time and decides to play instead knight f6. He doesn't want to take the pawn. And immediately, Gukesh plays a3. He's not thinking at all. He is in his preparation. He knows what he's going to play, and he's really putting the pressure on Ding even as early as move 4 and 5 here, okay? And again, watch Ding's time. He's at 1 hour and 19 minutes, 57 minutes. He thinks for over 20 minutes to play the move bishop g4, okay? I guess there's a lot of different ways you could play this position. I'm not an opening expert on the Blumenfield Gambit, so I'm not going to even pretend like I am. But he chooses it's not a bad move. It's not the main line, I guess, if there is a main line in this position. But he's just pinning the knight, pinning the knight. Gukesh trades the pawns and attacks the bishop. And notice, Gukesh has not even used a minute on his time. Okay, he's playing very, very quickly. Ding captures. Queen recaptures. Again, every move from Gukesh is instant. He is now up. He's up over 1 hour and 8 minutes on the clock, right? That's a huge time advantage. I mean, Ding is down. He's used over half his time, and we're only on move 8. Okay? Now, queen to c7. And Gukesh plays the move d3. Now, d3, you'll notice the eval bar moves just a little bit when he plays the move d3. This is a very complicated position, but apparently the move c5 can transpose into some of the positions from the Blumenfield Gambit where white has an extra move, and it's a very useful move. So playing c5 apparently was the way to go, and for some reason Gukesh didn't do it, and I don't know if that was missed. I mean, clearly he got into a nice position. He surprised Ding, and then instead of doing that, he plays d3. Not a bad move, but it's just totally different than what could have transposed some really nice positions, okay? And after a5, he pushes. We now have this c5 square. What do you notice about the c5 square? It's what we call a hole or an outpost. And black can very easily position a knight here, and it's not going to get chased away by this pawn because that pawn has been moved forward. And it's not going to get chased away by this pawn because you've got it blockaded, which means that knight can just sit there and be really, really, really annoying. And the fact that you've played a3 with your, let's just call it an extra move since you're white, might not be a good thing because the b3 square and the knight can jump into b3, right? So I think at this moment, after knight to d7, Gukesh realizes, wait a second, my position's not really as great as I thought it was supposed to be or whatever. And watch his time. He's got an hour and 53 minutes. He thinks for an hour. He thinks for an entire hour on one move in a 2-hour game. This is literally 50% of his entire time, and he used it on this move right here. It's the best move, but that's a sign that, like, wait a second, something in his mind was like, this is not working out the way that I thought it was. And all of a sudden, the momentum, the advantage, the pressure that he had from the opening has shifted. And now Gukesh is like, what's going on? He has no time advantage. They're equal on the clock. And the thing about it is Ding's position almost plays itself. He's going to put his knight on c5. He's going to push his pawn and bring the bishop out in castle and probably support this knight with the other knight. Like, it's very logical what he needs to do. And Gukesh, it now suddenly is kind of has his back against the wall, okay? Bishop to g2. The knight jumps back. Okay, this is very common when you have a knight like this on an amazing square. You want to make sure it's supported. And if it ever needs to move forward or gets traded by a piece, you'll be able to recapture with another knight and just replace it and keep going, right? And so also there's e5. Maybe you're threatening to come in here with some threats, right? So good move there by Ding. Gukesh castles. And Ding does play very quickly, knight e5. And Ding Liren is ahead on the clock. Even though he was down like an hour and 8 minutes, he is now ahead on the clock. And he has a good position, okay? The knight is on e5. It's attacking here, and it's also attacking here. Now, it might look like he's about to win a pawn, right? Because you got to move your queen, and he's just going to snap off the pawn. That's not quite the case. And there's a couple of interesting moves here that Gukesh could have played. Queen to d5 or queen to f4. In the game, he chooses queen to f4, which we'll come back to the game in just a second. But first, queen to d5 is interesting because, wait a second, aren't we just leaving this pawn free to be captured? Well, let's talk about it. If you take with this knight, the idea is, well, there's a couple of ideas. Number one, you could just grab here for one thing. That's just a pawn, and you might get this trade, and the rook moves, and the bishop goes back, and I don't exactly know what's happening. I guess you can grab this pawn. There's something here that white has, knight to d2. And apparently this is not a bad position for white. That black is not developed. And so yes, you're ahead of pawn, but once the rooks start coming into the game and the bishop gets out, and you also have to worry about this, pass pawn over here, it's not that simple for black, okay? So that's one thing. If you take with the other knight from this position after queen d5, then you simply grab on d4, and it looks like you're losing a material here. So watch this. Knight takes, rook takes, knight to b3 looks like a simple triple fork. Okay, it looks like an exceptional fork. However, there's this crazy line I wanted to show you. b6, counterattacking the queen. So if black takes your queen, you're going to take their queen. And yes, there's a fork. But if they do this, you take here, they're going to have to somehow sack back their rook. Otherwise, you just get a queen. So they go here. You take it. And at the end of the day, we just end up in this position, which is good for white. Okay, so it's not that simple. You can't just grab the exchange. That was if they took the queen. The other thing you could do is try to move their queen somewhere, for example. But then you can actually just sack the exchange. Queen b2, they take here. You don't even take it. This is wild stuff. You just ignore it. And the knight's going to escape, and you say, who cares? Queen check, I'm going on the offensive. And if this happens, the rook comes over, and you're going to checkmate the king. And if queen here happens, you're going to take here. And there's this is just totally wild. You're actually somehow winning as white because of this, and then rook d1. Okay, totally chaos. The point is there's a lot going on in the position, and queen d5 would have actually been a very nice try, is what I was trying to say. Okay, queen to d5. That being said, queen to f4 is also on Stockfish's radar and also works for different reasons. First of all, this knight can't move because you have a pin and you simply take the queen. And if this knight captures, well, again, you can take on d4, or you can even go queen e4 if you want to put pressure in a different way. Like, for example, you might play f4, chase the knight away and take the knight, but also just taking on d4 is a relatively equal position. So you're trading the pawns, and I don't actually know what's happening. I don't think you can really take this because you lose this. And anyway, let's get back to the game. So The point is, he's not losing a pawn, even though it looks like he is. He's not. So queen f4, good move. Okay. Let me check my notes because I wrote some important things here that we need to talk about. So rook comes over to d8, fine. Rook comes to d1. This is a very awkward move for white, but what are you going to do? He's adding a defender, but it's like your rooks really should be doing more important things with their life than defending pawns, right? I mean, look at these rooks. These are bad rooks. And right here, Ding plays g6. Now, he plays this move quickly, and you have to wonder what was going through his mind, because they were talking during the game about how e6 was just a very simple plan. This is probably where your bishop needs to come out, somewhere here. Then you can castle, and then you can push these pawns forward, and you have an amazing position. You can see the eval bar is like, yeah, black's doing very, very well here. And it's, I mean, this is an obvious move. Like, this is a move that like a lot of beginners would just play naturally. Like, oh, let me just get the bishop out. Like, there's not a lot of complicated things around that. I don't know why he didn't play that. Instead, he played g6, and he's doing this. He's also maybe h5. He wants to go here with the bishop. Like, I don't know. But it was a very quick decision. He actually was ahead on time. He could have spent time to think. Plays that, and the advantage kind of disappears a little bit, okay? We get a4, h5, b6, which is, it's not really a pawn sacrifice because you can't take it, because your knight is undefended. So he's gaining space, but he's also doing something, he's clearing this square. And this is really important, especially in these types of weird positions where things are kind of locked up and you can't really get your pieces through. Sometimes, you know, having a square on the board be available for your piece is much more valuable than keeping an extra pawn, right? So he's pushing this forward. Even if this pawn gets captured at some point in the future, he's like, look, this square is going to be super valuable for me. Maybe I'm going to put my knight there. Maybe I'm going to put my rook there. You know, somehow I'm going to use that. Also, it's kind of annoying, like black has to make a decision. Okay, where do you put your queen, which we'll talk more about in just a second. So, that's kind of what's going on. He goes queen to d6, but now bishop to a3 is an annoying move because now you're pinned, okay? And you have to be a little bit careful here because whenever your pieces are pinned, if they get attacked, you could be in trouble. For example, knight d2, e4, right? Now you're attacked. You're going to lose a piece, right? You have to watch out for stuff like that. So Ding has to be careful now. He kind of went off track with this g6, h5 plan instead of just going with the simple e6. And now Gukesh is pressing him, right? Both players are pretty even on the clock, okay? Right about 20 minutes, and we are at move 18. So they have to make 22 more moves with less than that much time. Basically less than a minute per move for the rest of this game until they hit move 40, right? So time pressure is a big factor at this moment in the game, all right? I just want to point that out. So bishop to h6, he develops his bishop with a tempo on the queen, which is nice. Bishop takes c5, and they go for this trade. If you take the queen, white's going to take your queen, and then when the dust settles, takes, you're losing a piece, right? White has two pieces, black only has one. So that does not work, and so you do have to recapture here on c5, which he does. Queen to e4 sidesteps the attack from the bishop, also attacks on b7, knight to c6, and the move knight to a3. Now, remember what we talked about earlier. This b5 square is open, which means the knight can come in and start creating all kinds of threats, right? Knight on b5, you might jump in here, you might jump in here because the pawn is pinned, you might take this, you might just sit there and wait. It's an annoying situation, right? Okay. Rook to d7, knight to c2. He actually ignores that and goes for a different square that leaves this option open for the rook to maybe invade, right? So the rook can be involved, but it continues to put pressure on d4, and also he might be trying to prevent knight to b4 because if, for example, you just jump in and black can jump in, you know, this could be an annoying knight. Maybe not right now. There's some tactics, but this is also something that he's keeping an eye on. So knight to c2. Okay. Queen takes b6, so he grabs the pawn, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not because now the rook comes over, right? And he's lined up. So Stockfish says the position's relatively equal, but move 23, only 14 minutes and 17 minutes on the clock. The time pressure and the nerves are the biggest thing going on in this position. Who's going to be able to stay calm? Who's going to be able to not make any mistakes? Who's going to be able to continue playing good moves even when you don't have time to think it through, right? That's the big story of this position. Queen goes back to c7, rook to b5. And we talked about it earlier, right? That pawn being out of the way is a very, very nice thing for Gukesh because he's able to use this file for his pieces. And just being down one pawn is a great trade to be able to use all your major pieces, right? So rook to b5, castles. And right here, I think Gukesh surprises Ding with a very sneaky move. Probably the things that that Ding was thinking about was that, okay, Gukesh is going to bring his rook over. He's going to double up to attack me. Maybe he's going to play queen e1 to put pressure like this. Those are the kind of moves. The move that Gukesh plays, knight to a1. He puts his knight in the corner. Why would you do that? Well, in this particular position, it makes sense because he wants to put it on b3. That's the only way to get there. Why is b3 so much better than c2? Because on b3, you're attacking here and here and here, which is a fork, and you're going to come in and just start attacking everything, right? It's a much better square for the knight. And I think this move surprised Ding because you'll notice his time. He's at 14 minutes. They're basically even. He spends 7 minutes. Keep in mind, this is move number 25. Move 25. He has to make 15 more moves. And he only has 14 minutes on the clock, and he spends 7 of them right here trying to figure out, oh, what am I going to do if knight to b3? It's probably one of those things where it's like, oh, that's a good move. Now, Stockfish finds a really interesting response here, which, okay, it's Stockfish. But basically what Stockfish says is, look, stop trying to defend everything on the queen side because you're not going to be able to do it. Just forget about it and play e5. And let him go ahead and attack you over here and play f5 and start creating counterplay with your pawns over in this section of the board. Right? Really interesting idea, and it makes a lot of sense. Queen's going to move somewhere. Stockfish says, let's see, rook d6, and I don't know what white's going to do. Jump in and is attacking you here. Queen f7. You know, Stockfish is basically saying, look, you're creating counterplay over here. Maybe you're going to start throwing these pawns forward. Even if you lose a pawn, who cares? I'm actually curious. What is the g5? I knew there was some crazy move from Stockfish. g5, and you take here, and I don't know how good this is, but it would have been a nice way to mix up the game, okay? Instead, I think Ding panics a little bit. I think he panics a little bit. He's like, oh no, I didn't think about knight to b3. I'm not sure what's happening. And he plays sorry, this is not to the game. Let me go back to the game. He plays rook to b8. Which, okay, he's trying to defend, but he's just not going to be able to. And putting your pieces on such passive squares usually is not the solution. It's just 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be the right solution. But he's like, I don't want to run out of time. I have to make like 15 more moves. I have to do something. He plays rook b8. Knight to b3, very obvious move. You're attacking here, you're attacking here. And also, maybe even more importantly, you're jumping into c5 and attacking here. Okay, you're going to have both rooks at some point. You're the knight. It's a bad situation. Stockfish says you have to go rook d6 to get away from this fork proactively. But Ding plays e6 instead. The knight jumps in. Now you have to move your rook. He goes rook e7. And there is the opportunity right here for Gukesh to sacrifice his knight. And the point is that if the rook takes, you're going to grab this here and go into this endgame, which is very pleasant for white. And if black tries to, let's just say, go knight to b4, you can just grab the pawn here. This also looks pretty good for white. So that was an option. Instead, he decides to just increase the pressure by playing the rook over, doubling up. Okay, keeps attacking it. And in this position, Ding cracks. He plays queen c8. And if you would like to pause, what's the winning move for white? Well, it's a relatively basic tactic. It's taking advantage of the pin here, and it's a queen sacrifice. Queen takes c6, instantly caused Ding to resign. The idea is that if you take with the pawn, which is what you would like to do because you don't want to lose your queen, you're going to lose your queen anyway. The rook comes down. You're now pinned, and when the dust settles, let's count. Rook, rook, bishop, bishop, knight. He just has an extra piece. And on the queen sacrifice, if you try to take this way, that doesn't really help you because, again, you're coming out down material. In this case, it's even worse. You're down now a full rook. And Ding actually resigned immediately after he saw queen takes c6. He just cracked under the time pressure. Now, I have to say a couple things. Number one, even in just this game, what if he would have made some of those decisions earlier a little bit faster, right? Instead of spending 40 minutes on one move and 20 minutes on one move in the opening, maybe he would have had some time in this position to think some things through. That's just one observation. The other observation is now Gukesh takes a lead, 6-5. It makes you wonder, does Ding regret not pushing more in those previous games, not trying to create some winning chances when he had the opportunity? Now, of course, it's easy for me to say that. It's very easy for me to say that when I'm looking at the engine and saying like, oh yeah, you could do this and this and this and this and you get into a great position. Like he didn't know that, right? But it makes me wonder, does he regret that? Because now he has very little time to make a comeback, okay? The winner of this tournament, you just have to get to 7.5 points. Gukesh is at 6. That means if he wins one more game and then gets a draw, he wins. Or if he just draws the next 3 games, that's also going to be enough to win. So Ding, I think next game, he's going to be white. He's got to push. That's his moment. He's got to make a comeback in the next game. So I think game number 12 is going to be very interesting because Ding is forced to push. Unless he's okay just losing the match, right? Nice game, nice finish. Pretty wild stuff with the time usage in this one and the opening choice. And yeah, I'm just glad we got a decisive game finally. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And I will see you for game number 12. Stay sharp. Play smart. Take care.